So now it's about practice, and we have a practitioner panel who I will very briefly introduce because I'm sure they will introduce themselves. We're going to take the order from the top running down. So we have James from Great Western Credit Union, which is down in Bristol area, around about Bristol. We have Teresa Manning from Clockwise Credit Union, which is in Leicester and around about that area. We have Séan Murray from Comma Lynn into Credit Union in Ireland, which is a teachers' credit union for teachers, I think, in primary schools, mostly. And then fourth, we have Paul Norgrove from Serve and Protect Credit Union. And for those that don't know Serve and Protect is a police credit union for the police family. So I'm going to pass over. There isn't a question. It's all about reaction. Thoughts and ideas and challenges and questions and worries, maybe even, all around the digital transformation in the credit union sector and your experience of it. So we're going to take the list as on the board down from the top. So I'll pass over now to James. James.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everybody. I am James Berry. I'm the Chief Exec at Great Western Credit Union. You may have known us better as Bristol Credit Union, which we were until a couple of years ago. And as well as being based in Bristol, we now cover a very wide geography from Gloucester right down to the south coast in Dorset and across to Swindon as well. So a very broad geography. I think in terms of transformation more broadly and digital transformation in particular, I thought just a couple of things to share really. So firstly, our approach to digital transformation, which we set about back in 2018, 2019, in trying to figure out how we were going to react and how we were going to build a digital future that our members were looking to more and more. So recognising that I'm now actually quite old and have been doing this for quite a long time, I was almost certainly not going to understand entirely what the technology answers were going to be because I'm not a technologist. What I tried to do at the time, though, was to go out and engage with as many different people as I could do. So whether it was suppliers, whether it was academics, whether it was people who were running coding clubs, people who were involved in building Amazon Web Services, all the sorts of different technologists that I could, just to try to get a feel for what the emerging themes were and what they would do if they were in my shoes. And that was really, really helpful because eventually it enabled us to arrive at a set of principles that we worked to when we tried to figure out exactly what platform we wanted to introduce and what that platform needed to do. And working from those principles meant that we could have really good conversations with potential suppliers and that we had a good way of assessing what was out there already and where there were gaps, what we might need to build and customize ourselves. So I won't go into what all the principles were. It was a very good approach though, and I'd definitely recommend that outward look, that engagement with people who do know what they're talking about to help you figure out at least what the questions should be. I think the other big thing, though, from transformation is that a digital transformation very much is around transforming the whole organisation. And we've done that in a couple of ways, really. So we are a fintech. Great Western Credit Union is a fintech. We say that without shame, without any kind of sense of irony. We see ourselves very much as a fintech. We see ourselves as being of a fintech mindset. And by that, I mean we've evolved organisationally and we've evolved the culture to adopt very much a one where we listen to users, listen to the people who are going to be using our services, our members, at the forefront of what we do. So when we go out to figure out what we need to design next or what technology we need to engage with next, we don't do it from a lens of what's going to be good for the credit union or what's going to make us more operationally efficient. We do it with a view of what do members want? What are they telling us they use? We do loads of user testing as well. And we actually go out and see how people use our system in real life as opposed to how we thought they would use it. The two are often quite different things. It can be a bit annoying in that having improved the digital platform vastly over the last 4 years, you then go out and ask them what they want. And of course they want the next thing, which then means you need to keep developing. So when we had a new way of engaging with our online member portal, which didn't involve remembering your mother's maiden name and your first cat's name and all the rest of it, and had a much more secure two-factor authentication approach. When we went out and said, how's this working for everybody, they said, well, actually, we want to be able to log in with just our face or our fingerprint. So things evolve very quickly. But listening to the users and listening to the members is paramount. And I think organisationally as well, there's a big shift in culture from one where maybe we were all collectively across the organisation very comfortable with how things had worked for 10 to 15 years, 20 years maybe, in some cases, particularly my own, to one where we had to accept that things needed to change, that we had to transform across the organisation. And that transformation mindset and building those skills, that capability, that comfort with change is really hard on the people and is really hard to do with the people. And so that, I think, has to be a really big part of anybody's transformation journey. It's not just the tech, it's not just the processes becoming more efficient. It's building a culture that says, how can we continually innovate? How can we be curious, questioning, listening, and how can we keep doing that over time? So I'll leave it there for now and hand over to one of the leading pioneers of technological transformation in the UK, Teresa Manning.
Thank you, James, for that introduction. Like James said, I think we consider ourselves to be a fintech as well. We've worked really, really hard, and we created our strategy back in 2017. I think it came on the back of the failure of a national programme, and I suppose we looked around and we couldn't really see at that particular time any viable alternatives. So we decided to build our own. So we've gradually built an open platform which includes everything you would expect or want for a credit union. It was risky. It was a decision that was not taken lightly. The board spent a lot of time thinking about whether that was the right thing for us to do. But we had the resources, so we decided to do that. The important thing was really that we involved the staff in all the design processes. So all the member-facing staff had a role in designing anything relating to member channels,
Something liquid.
transactions, things like that. We also listen to members. You know, the vast majority of them do want 24/7, 24/7 loans, 24/7 access to their money. We also listen to the 5%, whatever it is, who can't be digitally excluded. So we found that the cost savings through using digital channels enabled us to focus on those people. So that was good. So what we've got is cloud-based, API-driven modules, so that you can select all or part of whatever you want. Decision engine, CRM, everything you would expect from a modern core banking platform, really. That's it. I shall wait for questions.
Thanks very much, Teresa. From what I heard in the bar last night, there'll be loads of questions. In fairness, anyone who goes out and develops a system is very impressive. Séan Murray is my name. I'm the Chief Executive of Corlin, INTO Credit Union. Sorry, Paul. It's an Irish word. It means cooperate. And I suppose we were talking at our table earlier on. I'm not so sure credit unions are always the best at cooperating. I suppose we look after the primary school teachers in Ireland, and they come across the whole island of Ireland. So digital service and being able to serve those members remotely is a huge part of what we do. It is very, very important to us. And when we start to think about the future, I want you to think about that's the lens that we look at digitization. We've about 28,000 members, and 75% of those 28,000 members would have done a transaction with us in the last 3 months. So we have a lot of activity that takes place digitally and remotely. And I suppose the unique nature and the unique identity of the credit union is something that we have to think deeply about as we go about giving service. I'm a dad of 3 girls, and I suppose when I think about service, they also influence, as younger people will always influence what we do. I suppose I'm an adventurer as well, and I have a preference for the future, so make sure you ask the questions about the future and not the past. I think when we look at service in Corlin, again, as I said, it's all about digital. It's all about how do we give that service to our members such that they get the same experience, they get the same kind of warmth and feeling from the credit union, but that they have access to digital technologies, and that the solutions we put in place allows them to get that access. It allows them to get that service and that warmth and that kind of experience of what a credit union, if you think about it locally, is, but they come from across the island of Ireland. When I talk to my children, and when I talk to, or when we do research, we've got a new verb in Ireland. It's called to revolute. I don't know if it's as relevant in the UK or not, but it's actually, our younger people are, they revolute money to each other. They no longer transfer money. It's we revolute it. They split the bill. They go out for dinner. They split the bill. All of those things. So our competition in Ireland is maybe slightly different to what has taken place internationally. And I know in the UK, for example, you've got things like open banking, which really haven't been adapted in Ireland as much. So I suppose that's very, very interesting. We did some research, and with our younger teaching cohort, so these are people all over Ireland, and it was ease is a lifestyle and simplicity is the watchword. So when we're thinking about financial services, when we're thinking about what we have to do, which is to put those financial services into our members' hands, that's always what we have to be thinking about, ease and simplicity, and I suppose to revolute. The last thing I'd say really is just maybe about the future and about artificial intelligence. And the country head for IBM in Ireland recently spoke about artificial intelligence, and IBM obviously have Watson. And what she said is that AI won't replace people, but people who use AI will replace people who don't use AI. And I think that's probably true for credit unions as well. So as we start to kind of adapt and build on these technologies, we have to incorporate them into what we do. One of the things we're trying to do in Corlin is, as well as think about those digital transformation projects, is also to engage in research and to engage in academia to try and understand what that future looks like and what will service mean in that future. So we've actually engaged a group of master's students to do a project on, I suppose, digitization, service, and the future, and how do we always bring that human-centric approach to service and give that into our members' hands. I suppose my last thing is to think about COVID and the lessons that one of my key lessons from COVID was adaptability and resilience and being able to change when change was required. So I think as we think about the future, I think that adaptability, that resilience is something that we all need to really pick up on and really start to look at how we can serve our members into the future. So I suppose I'll leave it there, but if there's any questions, I'll hand you over to Paul.
Thank you, Sean. It's always difficult going after lunch. Normally it's the gap between trains, planes and automobiles to go home. And Nick and co have kindly inserted George, so it makes it even harder to cover this session. But really I was going to sort of summarise some of the themes for the day and really break it down into three chunks that are complementary to some of the stories up on stage, which is predominantly digital transformation as a strategy, or for some credit unions, maybe some in the room, maybe not, digital transformation is the strategy. And when you kind of dig into it, it's when we get the system or if we could change our core. And I think it's in the programme that this is not an IT session, but just sort of imploring everybody to really think about their own strategy that digital transformation is part of, but it should never be definitive. There are matters of your business that are absent of digital transformation that you could just make better without. But then there's also ones that are complementary, and then absolute necessities moving forward. You talk about AI, we'll be there eventually. It's going to be a necessity. But it's probably similar to the session before lunch. Too many credit unions I observe just freezing in time, waiting for something to come along. And by the time that happens, the relevance word, you become even more irrelevant rather than relevant. And that brings me nicely onto my point two, which was supply chain. And I'm never going to plug any organisation or supplier, because they are exactly that. And I think we have to be careful as a sector that we don't see them as too much of the family. I don't know about anybody else's family, but mine's quite dysfunctional, both in and out of work. So they are suppliers, and we need to get a little bit better about being commercially sensitive and demanding of the suppliers there. But really, you can break them down into 3 categories, which is, you know, I think Paul Rooney said earlier, you know, they're maybe a bit clunky, stuck in the mud, traditional suppliers. There's new fintechs emerging into the market. You know, jam tomorrow, we've all heard that phrase. You know, just be realistic, because we're all dealing with our members and our own careers and making sure that expectations are managed. We don't need to be promising the world. You know, come on a journey together. And I think some of the inefficiencies and lack of credit union control of those, and George talked so eloquently last night about credit unions and CUSOs and how credit unions could commercially maybe support the direction of that. You know, that's why we've got some fantastic things happening up on the stage with Clockwise and Great Western, where they've seized the initiative to go their own way. And I think there's lessons to be learned from everything, and I think we can coexist. And moving towards maybe member owners from credit unions into those organisations is something that I think could be really exciting and beneficial, you know, taking inspiration from our colleagues across the globe. And the last one was people, and I think Karen kindly said, credit unions start and end with people. And often when we talk about digital transformation, it's so member-centric, and we go, the members expect this, the members want this. If you had members of your team who on the last week of March 2020, when you sent them a laptop in the post, they couldn't set it up, and they struggled and they worried, how on earth do you think those volunteers or staff members are going to cope with full digital transformation of systems and processes? Because it's not the tech, it's everything that changes. And I think we seldom take the opportunity to look inward in our organisations and say, are they actually ready to come with us on the journey? You know, I did my dissertation in employee engagement and making sure that people are in tune with your organisation, and you have to take them with you. And I think the people within our organisations often get overlooked, but we also need to be honest and realistic. You know, the adaptability of our staff are changing, their expectations of us as businesses are changing, and we can't lose them in the conversation about digital transformation, because, you know, employees are looking for that. And ultimately, you know, the system's not going to do it. You know, it needs to be driven internally. And that brings me back to the point that it was on Nick's first ever slide, I think, the build it and they will come, field of dreams quote. You know, collaboration is a wonderful thing, and I'm not going to mention the person because I briefly did before, but collaboration within the sector means we all have to lose a little bit to win collectively. And I think, you know, some of us are unwilling to concede. You know, we're all strong people and personalities, but it comes back to it's the only way we'll get scale, relevance and market share. And, you know, plug for Matt Bland at the back in terms of the podcast. You know, being deliberate with our decisions and making sure it's either solving a problem for us and our members, or it's pointing us our direction of our purpose as credit unions and mutuals. So that was it from me, and I'm sure there'll be some questions.
Okay, thanks everybody. Hope this is working again. I think it was working when I went outside talking about my cough as well too. Cough. Thanks everybody. Thanks to James, Teresa, Sean and Paul, and apologies for mispronouncing call in. That's right now, I think. But it's over to everybody else. We've got about 15 minutes or so to stimulate and a conversation and engage with our panel members. Lots of people here are practitioners or are on boards and who kind of interrelate with practitioners all of the time. So I just thought we might have a few questions, thoughts. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a thought, a comment. It can be a reflection. Are we going to... Okay, Michael's coming in from Core Credit Union.
Different core,
Different core,
but
pretty
easier to pronounce. A question for Teresa, and I suppose to continue maybe the conversation from last night at the bar, where I was greatly impressed by what they've achieved.
Should have gone to bed.
You know, you've achieved a huge amount on a small budget. You've effectively a full new system with debit cards running on it and all that. Do you feel your system is exportable from the point of view I'm looking from an Irish perspective? Do you think it's a system that can scale to other credit unions and into the Irish market as well?
Apologies, I'm quite hard of hearing, so I've got my little hearing person here for me. It was always built to be multi-tenanted. It was always built to be shared. I did ask Simon this question about the Irish credit unions because I knew I'd get asked. So, yes, there would be some development work, but there's no reason why in the fullness of time. We are in the process of developing a strategy for sharing. Our preferred option would be a QSO on a not-for-profit basis. We would like to get back some of the money we've invested. Clearly, we've invested quite a lot of money. We've got a team of 9 now in our technology. You know, we've spent probably £1 million, but that's nothing compared to what other organisations and vendors have spent to deliver, which is what we've done. So yes, yeah, it was always meant to be shared. It was built to be shared.
Okay. Thanks, Teresa. Another question. Here we are. Yeah. Gareth.
Hi. We've got some real leaders in this area up on the stage. It'd be great to hear what you and James said about continually innovating and what's next. It'd be great to hear what you all think is the next thing that you want to achieve in terms of technology or digitalisation.
Okay.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak without formulating any thoughts on the question. In terms of what's next, I guess my quick answer would be I don't know. I think there's probably lots of things happening that we need to be mindful of and research and thinking about. But I don't know exactly which one is going to be the right thing to be focused on immediately. We've got some very short-term things individually at Great Western Credit Union. So probably touching on some of the themes earlier, particularly that we were discussing on our table earlier, around trying to personalise the digital. So how can we deliver personal service digitally? Because ultimately, with a massive membership area from Gloucestershire right down to the sea in Dorset, we can't be in every place all the time. But one of our points of difference, one of the things that makes us different to another online loan company down the road or in London or wherever it might be, is that we want to be personal and personable. So trying to figure out how can we do that at scale remotely is one of our key challenges right now. Exactly what the answer is, I'm not entirely sure yet, but we've got some ideas on it. But what the next big things are, I think that goes back to the engagement with others, to the outward look, to the engagement with academics and others, just to try to figure out from all the experts what are the things that we should be thinking about and what are the questions that we should be asking about those things that we should be thinking about.
No, next step. Yeah, as I said, next steps are sharing the technology, how we're going to do that. Aside from that, there's a lot of work to be done. Technology does not, you don't just deliver it and that's it. It's a constant moving, it's a constant, I mean, one of the earlier things that we did was a mobile app. That's already out of date, so one of the things we're doing now is going back to the mobile app, a new website, things like that. So it never ends. It's always there. So there's always things to be done. What else were we doing? Oh yeah, the current account as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. I was so there's loads of technology things that we're doing, but actually we did some to go back to that research with another group that I'm involved in, and we asked people what they use technology for in their lives. And I'm going to give you 2 quotes. One which is really obvious, which is my phone runs my life. You know, it does. My phone runs my life, and I bet 90% of us are in the same boat. But here's the one that I just cannot get my head around, which is I use it for the boring practical stuff. Rather than owning a bike, I'd use an app and hire one. I cannot get my head around why you wouldn't just own a bike and have it there available to you to use whenever you would want it. The mindset now is actually, I have it on my phone. I can get any service, any product, anything that I want. I don't have to own it. I can just go onto an app on my phone and maybe get it delivered to my door, or maybe go and hire a bike and go and cycle somewhere. I just can't get my head around that. So I suppose that for me is the next critical kind of technology question for us as credit union is, you know, what is it that around the corner?
Some really cool stuff there. I think in the immediate term, I mean, we onboarded 1,000 new members in October, and the team aren't seeing that as a positive because of the pain that comes with origination and onboarding at the moment. It's quite manual. So loan origination and onboarding. But I think the immediate thing for us and probably many credit unions is, you know, we're open 35 hours a week in reality for human tasks, that everything we do needs some kind of human interaction. So we're quite happy with the impact we're making in 35 hours a week. Can't wait till we're open 24/7. That would be the immediate goal for us.
Good. Thanks, everybody. So now another question, maybe from this side of the room. Another thought. We got a thought, comment, a reflection. There we go. Matt.
Hi, hello, it's me again. I was just wondering about scale and how scale plays into technology. We talked about collaboration already, but I like to be a bit controversial. I think there's too many credit unions that are too small, mine included, and I'm wondering, is it time that we grew up and, you know, merged together, and rather than collaborate, we gain scale through joining forces and that way provide a better service through technology and otherwise? I wonder what the panel think.
Good question, Matt. Thanks. Who wants to start? Paul.
Quick one from me. Yes.
That was very quick, Paul. Is it not about the members and serving those members? So if scale does that, then scale is part of what you need and how you solve that. Mergers is probably one way of doing it, but there's loads and loads and loads of other ways to acquire scale without necessarily mergers. And in our discussion at our table, we were talking about, I think I used the phrase, we're small organizations. And I was picked up on it because actually scale and technology gives you the power to be large organizations. We're not kind of limited by scale anymore, because actually we can get to scale very quickly through the use of technology. I suppose it's how do we get there? And I think that's where the creative thinking comes from for us as credit union leaders.
Yeah, I totally support mergers, really. We've merged with two, but they were both very small credit unions. What I haven't seen yet is strategic mergers, really. I haven't seen them. We've talked about them, we know how important they are, but they're not really happening. But I totally support mergers. I think it's the way forward.
As somebody who's done 8, I think, combinations with different credit unions over the years, maybe even more than that, maybe 10, going back right back to the original Bristol mergers in 2005, 2006, I support the idea of merger in order to generate scale. I think it's an interesting question, though, in that the technology now enables things to be done perhaps in a slightly different way, so you can get those economies of scale and that sharing, by being collaborative, without necessarily needing to combine organisationally. Now, I think one of the problems that's held us back, certainly in GB, as a sector, as a movement, is the fact that historically we've spent far too little on technology. So our biggest issue in many ways has been that well-known and well-loved, perhaps, incumbent supplier that many of us have used for many, many years, still sits there possibly at the base of some of our technological transformation. It's not in COBOL, which is a positive, but it's not far off it. And that being as cheap as it is has actually really held us back, because none of us are used to investing enough in technology to be able to do it as well as we could do if we spent a bit more. And I think one of the big leaps that we've found in doing our own transformation is that although we've done it, like Teresa, on a shoestring, it does just cost a lot more. And therefore, for more credit unions to be able to do the sorts of things that we've done, that all of us who've done some form of digital transformation have done, coming together and joining in some way, I think is absolutely a way to move that forward. Whether it's through QSOs, whether it's through merger, I think the point remains the same. Collaborate in some form in order to get bigger and be able to afford what you need to spend to do technology well.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to pass over to Karen now, who's going to, I think, got a reflection or a thought, or maybe a question.
Just thinking about that, because we're thinking about collaborating. Has anybody actually explored getting funding from a KTP, a knowledge transfer partnership, at all? No? Oh.
Anybody in the room?
Anybody in the room? No? Ever heard of a knowledge transfer partnership?
Wait a minute, let me get my phone.
Yeah. So, oh, you have.
I've done one with London Mutual Credit Union.
Right. So you don't want for Innovate UK funding, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So it's probably one of the few secrets that Innovate UK keep. So knowledge transfer partnership actually pays for you to have an associate work with you, but have a supervisor. So say have somebody like me in the university supervise a postgraduate or a master's graduate student between 1 and 3 years to work in the organisation to work on a subject of your choice. And the good thing about this type of funding is it's relatively easy to get. It's not as hard as applying to the UKRI and applying for a traditional academic piece of research. You're talking about 90% success rate when you join together. And if your company employs, which I don't know if any of you do here, probably not, if you employ over 250 employees, you would pay half towards the cost. If you're smaller than that, you only pay a third. So it's like 33%. But what you do get is a resource at a cut rate to mould with the intention of hopefully taking that person on to be part of your organisation as well, because you're moulding them to what you want. Now, that could be around machine learning, AI, business strategy and business model innovation, for instance. It could be around data ethics, it could be around governance, ESG, anything. So I just wondered, that would be a way for you to sort of come together, or a few of you get out KTPs and then coordinate what are the key topics that you want to and the funding's about between, I think, 1 and 3 million.
Good. Thanks, Karen, for that information. I noticed James took notes about it.
Yeah, I think thank you very much for that. I think that sounds like a great opportunity. And I think I'd absolutely bang the drum for engaging more broadly with academia. Our local university in Bristol is really strong in terms of fintech. We've just joined a partnership, or we've been part of a partnership for a while. It's just launched, which is called Future Finance for All. And that's a ESRC-funded research initiative looking to accelerate innovation within fintechs, and we're part of that group. You know, we've asked to be part of it. We've been we're bringing a strong voice for inclusion to that partnership, so we're a full part of it, and doing that sort of engagement, finding the MSc type programs that are looking for real life projects as well. Again, University of Bristol, there's a great data engineering course that's just started there. They're looking for real life projects to engage with. You've got challenges to solve. They're looking for those challenges. So speak up, reach out to them, get in touch with them, work with them. It's a resource that's fantastic for this particular topic in particular, because a lot of what universities are doing is research into the future, and they're looking for partners to work with in order to make that research real.
Good. Thanks, James. I think I have time for one last question or comment, and there we go. That's the last one.
Hi, Melanie Foster, Stockport Credit Union. So we've talked lots about collaboration, and I love the credit union movement, and I love the fact we're cooperative, but we don't actually cooperate. And one of the things I'd like to say today is, I think we've got the ability to do more if we do cooperate with each other. And one of the things I suggest, because anybody who uses curtains, when you mention it, we all make faces. I work in tech, and generally you have user groups, and the user group get together and they tell the software supplier what they want. And I'm really surprised that there isn't one where we can go and meet with Omnio and have a conversation and say, we're not happy with curtains and we'd like to do something about it. And I guess part of that's because a lot of us are waiting on Teresa to say to us, we're available and we'll buy it from you or we'll get involved with you. But in the meantime, why don't we create a user group, get together and go and speak to Omnio and tell them what we want? So I'll make my details available to anybody who's interested if they want to give me a shout, and we can talk about doing that.
Good. Thanks for that. Is there any comment on that one?
One of my other hats is I sit on sort of a quasi-executive of a user group for a supplier in Ireland, and the big challenge is getting us all to agree on those standards. But actually, it's really effective. It's a really effective way of creating, a future path when there are particularly regulatory changes, when there are new requirements for systems. But the suppliers don't always like it. So I think actually people like Karen as well would be, hugely important to bring that element. And that's something we're going to take away from today, is to engage more with academia to support those projects taking place. So maybe, Paul, you want to take the UK perspective?
Yeah, it's similar to Sean. Certainly all the technology partners or vendors we use, there are user groups. Similar to Sean, there's, we'll call them peaks and troughs of doing that. I alluded to it in the first bit, collaboration is not natural. I think the phrase is, it's not a natural human behaviour. And I think, the user group can also do one thing, it kind of makes you beholden to the supplier. And that's a really dangerous thing as well. So it's making sure that if you have a user group that you're the power play in that. But then you also need in between meetings and in between the actual talk and chatter and documentation to stick to it and change as a group and mould as a group, because one against the grain only probably much like the sector destabilises us and allows us to be patronised and beholden to suppliers. So the thing is, if you're in it, you've got to be all in together and stick it out together.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Are you another comment, Teresa?
The only comment really is that one of the reasons that we wanted to go down the QSO route was that everybody within the QSO would have a say in development. They would equally own it. And I think that's really important. I think, yes, we did it alone, but we built it it's by a credit union for credit unions, so because we knew what credit unions needed. But we know that there are going to be other credit unions that don't work in the same way as us and will want to do it slightly differently. But the QSO seems to me the fairest way of ensuring that we get what everybody needs.
Okay, so last point, James, or? Carry on. Okay. Okay, so on that last point, I'd just like to thank everybody, to thank James from Great Western, Teresa from Clockwise, Paul from Serve and Protect, and importantly, Sean from Call In. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for the other individual that referred the very important cultural Naked Gun 2. I feel that that's our contribution to the cultural world here in the United States, is the movie Naked Gun 2. It's really great to be here. I know that there's this thing out in the sky. It's this giant orb in the sky that you may not be familiar with that's causing a little bit of heat in this room. And I know that it's the end of the day, and I also know it's Friday and it's Black Friday and you're looking for all your great deals out there. So my task at hand here is to keep this discussion interesting, conversational, and something that you can take action with on Monday morning when you get back to your institution. Real briefly, a few of you were at dinner last night, but I just want to share some interesting statistics about the U.S. market very, very briefly, just to kind of give you some context of where I'm coming from. Since most of the work that I do is with the U.S. market. I have a note.
You dropped it.
Oh, I dropped it. Thank you. Yeah, it's from the two lovely ladies back there. Hi. Very quickly, the U.S. market is the largest credit union system in the world. We have $2.2 trillion in assets spread out amongst approximately 4,800 credit unions. There's a massive amount of consolidation going on within the credit union system. So what we find is that the surviving institutions tend to be much larger than we've seen in any other time period. The average size of a credit union in the United States now is approximately $300 to $350 million in assets. But the largest growing category are the credit unions that are above $1 billion. We have about $1.6 trillion in loans collectively. So if you think about that, if you think about our system as one financial institution, we would be the number 3 financial institution in the entire United States, only behind Chase, JP Morgan Chase, and Bank of America, and slightly ahead of Citibank and Wells Fargo from a banking perspective. So whereas each individual organization is not enormous, collectively we have scale and impact within the marketplace. Some things just to be aware of that's going on within the credit union system. The last discussion, one of the questions had to do with mergers and acquisitions. We're starting to see those strategic mergers of healthy credit unions tapping each other on the shoulder and say, we should probably combine our organizations for the future because of questions as it relates to scale and survivability. So even multi-billion-dollar credit unions in the United States are thinking along those lines. I have some opinions about that. I'm not sure that it makes a tremendous amount of sense for a lot of these strategic mergers, but those questions are starting to occur. The last thing that I think is important to understand is the same challenges that I've heard from yesterday, today, and then the pre-calls that we've had with Nick is the same financial challenges that you're having. We have a liquidity crisis in the United States. We're turning away loans. Credit unions are turning off the spigot from a lending perspective, really struggling to find deposits that aren't high cost. Year over year from June to June of 22 to June to 23, the cost of deposits went up by 253%. So, I mean, it was essentially from 0 to now 5.5% for the cost of money. So, same problems, same issues. Which brings me to a pointed question that I got from my good friend Irene. There's Irene right there, right? Irene? Yeah, from Liverpool. And the thing I love about people from Liverpool is that they're very subtle. But I had a really good conversation with Irene last night, and she asked me, what's your angle here? What are you doing here? What are you doing here? And I love that because whereas I currently live in the middle of the country in the United States, in Wisconsin, because that's where my wife is from and that's where her family's from. It's a delightful place to live, but people are so politely indirect that it's just infuriating. I'm an East Coaster. My mom is from Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is well known as probably the worst sports fans in the world. They boo Santa Claus when he comes to their football games. They throw snowballs at him. And then my dad's from D.C., where I grew up, and he was a car salesman. So you can imagine, very direct. So I love the direct question. And you know, the question is, what's my angle is, I'm very interested in credit unions, and I find wherever I go around the world, and I've had the privilege of traveling to a bunch of credit union systems from Brazil and Australia to Canada, all over the United States and here in the UK and Ireland as well. There's so much similarities in terms of organizations, and I think some of the experiences that I've been privileged enough to work at the Feline Research Institute as their head of research and development. It's a very interesting organization. We have a kind of a common founder in Ralph Swoboda, kind of a legendary figure in the U.S., and he had too much legend, so he came over here and created more legends. But you know, the more we studied any market, there's so many similarities. So my task here today is to kind of share with you some of the things that I've been thinking about and been up to, and hopefully some of these ideas and concepts can be useful and practical for you, and that's the watchword, is useful and practical. So we heard a lot today about information technology and the use of information technology. And what it means. And I just wrote down a few notes. One of the first things, I really like the squiggly design that you had around that. And I think you called it the wicked problems. The wicked problems. I like to call it, wicked problems is a great descriptor. I like to call it the giant hairball. Right? So imagine the giant hairball as an analogy for information technology in financial institutions today, especially small ones. Imagine trying to unravel the giant hairball. And that is the situation that we have largely in the United States. We're still small players, and everything that you said, Professor Elliott, as it relates to vendor relations, we experience as well. One of the biggest vendors that we have is Fiserv, which is a big public company. And their business model has been to acquire smaller core banking providers and basically slap the Fiserv label on it and say this is a new innovative product. And at the base, what you have are non-technology experts at the credit union that don't define what the requirements are that they need. So we rely too heavily on our vendors. So one of the observations that I think is interesting, and we alluded to it here in this last panel discussion, has to do with the concept of CUSOs. We are starting to see in the United States a resurgence of CUSOs, credit union service organizations, mostly credit unions combining to form new organizations to solve their own needs. And we're starting to see this in the forms of technology, saying, you know, the vendors that we sign long-term contracts with are not meeting the needs that we have, our consumers and our members, and our future consumers and members. So we're going to try to pool our resources together and figure it out. So I really enjoyed that discussion. And then finally, the last reflection I'd like to have on the discussions so far has to do with cooperation amongst cooperatives. One of the things that I'm in the process of, and it's in the bio, is starting a CUSO called the Strategy Circle. And the tagline for us is keeping the cooperative movement moving. Because when you actually look and see some of the actual research about, well, what does collaboration look like? Yes, we're starting to see a resurgence of it. We don't see enough of it. So what I'm trying to do is to put that into practice and trying to work with credit unions. The only thing that's holding me back is I don't like being in a regulatory world, but once I accept $1 of investment from a credit union, I get the regulators at my doorstep. So I'm making that decision right now as to whether we're going to become a CUSO or not. But really great discussions, and excited to share with you taking all of the stuff that we talked about today and putting it into a strategy and reality. And for me, a really good analogy, this is a picture of my wife from this summer. Some of you know, we talked about it earlier, my wife and I bicycled across the United States, human-powered. None of this e-bike silliness. And it's a great analogy for, whoops, did I hit the wrong button? Nothing happened. It's a really great analogy for having a vision of what you want to achieve and kind of coming up with a strategy for it. So the vision was, let's bicycle from Seattle to the Atlantic Ocean, 3,500 miles. Okay, that's a great vision. How are you going to do it? You need to have maps. You need to have the right equipment. You need to be in some sort of shape. You need to understand where you're going to sleep, where you're maybe not going to sleep, where you can get food, and all of those types of things. So I'm not going to talk about the bike ride anymore, but I think my wife has great legs, and it's a really cool picture. And by the way, the middle of America, if you haven't been to I know a lot of people have gone to Orlando and New York and LA, the vast majority of America looks like this. Soybeans on the left, corn on the right. So I've saved you a trip right there. Real quick, since 2020, which was an interesting year for everyone I know, I left Feline Research Institute and was part of the Great Resignation and decided to go off on my own. Since then, these are the organizations that I've worked with. I've worked with about a couple dozen, 40 organizations. And the thing that I'd like to point out is that many of the organizations I work with are smaller than the organizations that are represented in this room. So some startup credit unions, truly new credit unions, to tiny ones that are $10 to $12 million in assets. And yes, there are some large ones like Golden One Credit Union out in California, serves all of the state employees in California, and they have naming rights for the MBA facility. So they're a very large institution. Dupaco is a really interesting credit union out in Iowa that serves former meat packers in Dubuque, Iowa. And if you want to see real Americana, go to Dubuque, Iowa, right on the Mississippi. I get to go to all the sexy places in the world. But just to kind of give you a sense of the breadth and depth of organizations that I get to work with, and maybe why you should believe me. So the agenda today is just a few things. So first, I want to share with you my thoughts and observations about the evolution of credit unions. And this is just based on my work at Feline, doing a tremendous amount of research on behalf of the industry. The past 3 years, doing advisory work, basically being embedded in these clients that I just showed you. And with that evolution, I think comes some warnings and some risk. So we're going to talk about that. And then next, I'm going to introduce a thesis, which is the title of my book, which is Banking on a Human Scale. Those of you who came to dinner last night got a copy of it. If you're interested to purchase a copy, it's on Amazon. And if you want to give Jeff Bezos 7 pounds of your money, that'll be cool. But basically going to be walking through one aspect of the book, which has to do with strategy making. And then going to review kind of taking that thesis, which I don't think is very controversial, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. So we're gonna kind of do some really quick table work to gain an understanding of, well, what are your objections to this thesis of banking on a human scale, and I'll show you what that is. Then we're going to go into the detail of like, well, how do you make strategy? How do you take your vision of what you want to make happen and put it into a strategy? And we're going to do that through case study, through the infamous ABC Credit Union. I have not been permitted by my client to talk about who they are, but if you do some Google searching or some chat GPTing, you'll be able to find out who they are. It's pretty easy to figure that one out. And then I really, truly hope to have discussions throughout. I've incorporated some small table work, so it's not just me up here chatting to you before your Friday afternoon beverages of choice. So if you have questions or comments or say, hey, I don't agree with you, let's have that conversation. Make sense? Anybody want to change the agenda? Any alterations? Because we can't. This is if it was PowerPoint, we would be able to. This is a PDF. We can't change it. We cannot change it. Okay. So let me just briefly talk about this concept of credit union evolution. And I think that this holds true across systems that we see. So what I find is, generally speaking, everyone has the same founding story, right? It's usually a group of workers that have something in common, gathered together sometime in the 1900s, in your case it may be the 1800s, and put together like 12 nickels or 12 pennies and decided to create a credit union, right? Everyone has that same kind of founding story, regardless of when you started. Anyone here want to volunteer their founding story or their creation story at their credit union? Real briefly. This is the audience participation part of the session. I forgot to tell you guys. Anybody want to share? Anybody have a particularly good story? Nobody's making eye contact. It's like we're in church.
Shall I noble somebody?
Yeah. Okay,
so I'm going to noble Paul.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
the anniversary of this great.
Oh, congratulations.
20th, loosely 20th.
All right.
There you go. So let's
Here you go,
have
Paul.
some-
You're a shy guy.
Sorry, I'm really shy. Yeah, so it's officially our 20th year anniversary, but it's actually not. That was when we were merged with 7 different credit unions, but we claim 2003 as that. Our actual heritage goes as far back, and there's 2 of those credit unions that claim to be a founding credit union as a Christmas savings club for Merseyside or West Midlands police officers who put £10 in a biscuit tin and then would get it back at Christmas. So the purpose of that's quite interesting, but I'll leave George to go there.
Thank you. Yeah, and we see this so often, and after the founding, something interesting happens is that, especially in the United States, I don't know if it's the case in your localities, But the question of survivability is a real big question. In the United States, this is where we're talking about consolidation. I'm not talking about failures. I'm talking about credit unions that have merged with other credit unions. Pretty much 81% of the credit unions from the peak of the number of credit unions in the United States, as an example, in 1969, year I was born, I don't think that there's any correlation between this, but we peaked at the number of credit unions around 29,000 in the United States. Today we have 4,800, okay? So quick math says 81% of the credit unions didn't make it. So this question of founding to this point of survival, it's not a foregone conclusion, right? At least in the localities that I operate in, and you look at in Canada and Australia, and it's similar the case. But usually when we get to that point of survival, it's usually the board and the management team, they kind of look around the boardroom and they say, wow, what started off as a 25 euro or 25 pound idea decades ago, we've reached X millions of whatever currency you use. And they kind of look around and say, we've made it. We are a sustainable entity, okay? So there's obviously risk there. In the case of the United States, 81% didn't make it. Now, when you get to the growing stage, they basically say, okay, we were founded for a reason. We've survived. Now let's make some bets on things that are a little bit new, okay? And that gets into the category of we're growing, okay? We've grown from this really small type of mom and pop type of operation. We've survived. And now, hey, you know, some of these bets are paying off. And then when you get to the growing to the thriving category, and thriving is usually, geez, you know, it took us 7 decades to grow to XX millions of whatever currency, and now we're starting to see that flywheel turn a lot quicker. It's like we're starting to double in size every 5 to 7 years, and some of that may resemble some of your institutions. This is when it starts to get, in my case, in my sense, risky, because the strategy tends to become a lot more homogeneous. What tends to happen is that credit unions start to think a lot like bankers, okay, from a commercial banking perspective. And they also, at least in the United States and Canada, and especially in Australia, they also tend to hire people with a banking background, okay? So what we start to see is this lack of differentiation starting to come into the credit union system. Whoops. And then from the thriving to what I view as the place where I think credit unions need to get to is this concept of looking around saying we've become a successful institution. Why are we in existence today? We had this really great founding thesis about who we were, and now we find ourselves asking, well, we've kind of figured out this whole successful credit union thing. Why are we here? We need to find a new kind of founding mentality, and that usually, if correctly implemented, leads to differentiation, which is all about driving purpose through your activities in new and novel ways. Okay, so I see a lot of risk going from growing to thriving, and from thriving to differentiation is the riskiest, because those are the higher stakes things. You're a larger institution, and that's where I want to kind of set the table and talk a little bit more about strategy. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions or pushback on this concept, or are people like, I got to catch my train, let's just keep going. Let's just keep going, Red. Any questions or comments around this? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna come back there. Don't worry about it. Paul, Nick, I got this. I gotta get my steps in. No, you're good. You're good.
I think it's really interesting, thank you. And I was wondering, you kind of on this trajectory talking about essentially constant growth, and I wonder if you also see examples if we get to a point and then it starts to decline, and what you would do differently.
Yeah. So the question of growth is always a tricky one because that's usually an outcome of really good strategy. And in some cases, credit unions can be very have a very strong strategy, can be operating at a high level, but growth will plateau or even decline. and it's usually beyond the control of who they are. It's usually a factor of the economic conditions in which they operate. And in that case, that's where you tend to see most of the consolidation. And I'm not a big fan of the consolidation because of business cycles. And that's what I tend to observe, is that they tend to be cyclical in nature, and usually they do turn around with a different strategic outlook or different economic conditions. So I don't know if that helps answer the question. Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's start getting into this concept of the thesis of why I wrote the book, and a little bit of background about why I wrote the book. Do you guys remember the pandemic? Yeah? Did anybody have a great pandemic? Yeah. So I quit my job at Feline, and like probably most of you, I was stuck at home, which was not a bad thing, but I needed something to do. I am just such an itchy person, and I just need to just do activities. So I wrote this during the pandemic in front of our wonderful fireplace and maybe a few beverages of choice while reading it. And it was, and maybe Paul and Nick can relate to this, is working at a research institute, you're dealing with other people's ideas and work, and I had my own original ideas. And I don't know if it's coherent. I'll let people, when they read the book, tell me what they think. My mom thought it was great, even before she read it. She's like, Georgie, it's a great book. But here's the thesis. In a world dominated by scale and technology, smaller community-based financial institutions like credit unions have the chance to serve more people and serve them better by making banking more human. And I kind of give you a definition of what that means, and the book goes into great detail around that. And I've always been a contrarian from a strategic perspective, especially with organizations like credit unions, which have a true differentiated model, cooperative ownership, compared to the banking industry. But as I saw everyone kind of going into the world of technology and saying we need to be more bank-like, we need to integrate technology into every aspect of our operations, I said, whoa, wait a minute. We're kind of missing the human factors of this. So that's the thesis that I have, and I'd like to hear the yeah buts. I don't know if you use that terminology here, but it's a big one in the States. What are the yeah buts of that thesis, right? So as everyone else is going towards more and more use of technology, and we say, hold on a minute. We're smaller community-based institutions. We need to bring more of that human aspect into it. What are the yeah buts around that? And they could be things that you've already dealt with, or things that really kind of activate you. Any ideas on that? Yeah, I'm coming to you, Matt.
It's nice in theory, but it costs too much to run. Yeah, too many staff, not efficient.
Gotcha. That's a good point. It's a good point. As small organizations, we need to be really efficient. All right. Your name is Tina. All right. Hey, Tina.
It's not an either or, I don't think. And I think you can use technology, you can use digital, and you can have a human angle to it. But I think too much of the tech is process focused rather than human focused.
That's a great point. I was just with a client in the state of Michigan, and they had a consultant come through and talk about a giant hairball. This consultant specializes in assessing systems within the credit union. So they have a special process, or as they say in Canada, process. What do you guys say? Process? Process? Okay. Whatever we want to, that's right. To understand how their systems work, basically a network map of all of their systems. So there's systems that are quite obvious. What they discovered for a fairly small financial institution, they had 6,000 different applications running at the credit union, okay? 6,000. So this concept of, technology as a cure-all, They didn't have process and systems to kind of understand how do we bring new technology into it. And I think the mental model of that organization initially, they're changing right now, was technology solves all things. But if not created in a coherent way, it could be pretty terrible. What about any others? Yeah.
So it would be, yeah, but British credit unions are generally very good at doing it from a human point of view, but the word commercialism can almost become taboo because of it, so that it's possible to go too far in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, we do not want to discount the fact that technology is impacting our lives in very serious ways, right? And if we skew more towards the human side of things, we're going to be left behind. As one of my volunteer gigs over the years has been a volunteer board member at a food cooperative, and we were about the second or third largest food co-op in the country, and we were appropriately applying new technologies and expanding our operations. But it was so interesting as you would go across the country to see organizations that stayed true to their mission. And in the States, food co-ops started in the 1970s. And it felt like for some of those food co-ops that you would walk into, it felt like you were in the 1970s, right? They hadn't changed anything. So it felt nice, you know, it was kind of hippie, organic, all that kind of fun stuff. Really great food. Actually, some of the food looked like it was from the 1970s as well. But they became less and less relevant because they weren't keeping up with the times. Any last buts? Yeah.
Yeah, but if you want a young membership, you've got to stay with the tech.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. Yeah, you know, the next generation. You know, we've talked about this endlessly in many different forums. But next generation is digital natives, right? They're just so used to it, and that's their first call. I think with credit unions, the philosophy that they have right now from a technology perspective is digital first, but human second, right? That's how they're designing. And one bit of information that I shared yesterday, which I think is really quite interesting and touches on the point of the gentleman that asked the question before Nigel, or made the point before Nigel, is that in the United States, credit unions have held a consistently strong advantage over the commercial banking world in terms of customer satisfaction. There's an index that goes all the way back to the late 70s, early 80s, and credit unions would always beat banks despite our small size by 10, 15 percentage points. Starting in 2021 was the first year that banks scored better than credit unions. And it was because credit unions in the United States were behind on the digital side of things. Now we're starting to catch up, but it's an early warning sign that if you don't keep up with new technology, that you're going to maybe not meet the expectations of the next generation. So here's what I hear from my clients. Yeah, but our competitors are ginormous, right? If you don't elevate technology to the most important thing, we can't compete against these organizations. JP Morgan's the biggest in the United States. I think HSBC is the largest in Great Britain, and I believe Bank of Ireland's the largest in Ireland. So, you know, when we think about the competition, you know, the credit union down the street is generally not the thing that your customer is comparing themselves to, or they're not comparing you to the credit union down the street, they're comparing you to HSBC, Bank of Ireland, or in our case, JP Morgan Chase. Second thing is that consumers, despite the fact, guys, that we love financial services and we think about it most of our days, for most people, this is the most boring, dreadful thing in their whole lives. So as a result, you know, you think about other categories within the economy, within, you know, consumers and the choices that they make. In financial services, and we actually did research on this at Feline, the maximum number of brands that any consumer is going to keep in its brain in the banking world is 3. There's a really interesting professor from Fordham University. Her name is Lerzan Aksoy, and she has this research project that turned into a popular book. It's called the Wallet Allocation Rule. And it looks industry by industry at how many brands a consumer can hold in their mind just from a consideration perspective, right? So if you're not top of mind for the thing that's the most important for people, technology, how can you be competitive? Because I can tell you right now, pick any consumer off the street in the United States, the first brand that they're going to say is Chase. Second one is going to be Bank of America. And maybe that third choice is going to be the local credit union down the street from them, okay? So that's the thing that I hear. And they have a bigger megaphone to play with. Yeah, but regulations can limit what we do, right? If you're like credit unions in the United States, we have a lot more limitations than the commercial banking sector in some areas, and it just puts limitations on us. And if you can't read that, do you guys ever see those motivational posters that were very common in the 1990s in offices? There's a great site. It's called verydemotivational.com. And there's some pretty hilarious ones. It says government regulation. You know when the government didn't regulate everything, ... That was awesome. Consumers' demands are insatiable. As a new delivery channel comes out, consumers want that plus the branch, plus the call center, plus everything else, right? So we live in this multi-channel world, and that's a common refrain that we hear. And then finally, someone mentioned this earlier, but we don't have the resources to compete. I was incorrect last night that JP Morgan Chase spends $15 billion annually on their technology. They actually only spend $12 billion, okay? And for reference, this is a picture of $1.5 billion. Whether they spend it correctly is another question. So these are all the yeah buts that we tend to hear. So when I think about, okay, well, how do we advance this thesis of banking on a human scale? So within the book, I just talk about a variety of areas that we're not going to go into detail today, but I think are really important just to briefly touch on, because these are important touchstones for credit unions. The first and most important thing is just to start with the consumer. Start with the consumer in mind. This is how we started as credit unions initially. And I'm not sure about you, but many credit unions have started to stray from this. One of the first questions I asked the CEOs that I work with is, when was the last time you had a genuine conversation with a member? Now, I know that's probably different here in the UK, and I don't want you to lose that because you have these genuine conversations. When you're talking about billion-dollar credit unions, okay, the CEO will say, well, I participated in a focus group. That doesn't count. Like truly had a true conversation with a member, and it tends to be very rare. So starting with the consumer in mind. And the one thing that you'll find out, and you probably see this in the case of your members, is most of our members and most consumers are completely irrational, right? We create systems and processes, and we think that people will behave in a certain way, and they behave in a completely different manner. There's a Harvard professor named Frances Frye who put this, I think, so well. She talks about service industries, and she said service industries are the only industries where your consumer can come on the quote-unquote shop floor and ruin everything, right? So imagine working in a manufacturing facility and you have a customer come in and they screw around with a die and tool. That's kind of like what we have in the service industry. We create this service environment and we think this is how most people will behave, and then when you unleash it on humanity, they kind of screw it up. So start with the consumer, research appropriately. I'm a big fan of research, but I'm a big fan of qualitative research, and I think it's directly linked to this with starting with the consumer. You just need to talk to people. When you talk to people, you gain really clever insights that your competition either can't or won't do. Innovation is another thing that we focused in on at Feline. We were known not just as a think tank, but a think and do tank. So taking the research and actually doing stuff with it. And what I found, and this is borrowed from Google, where they basically place bets on their innovation portfolio on a 70-20-10 mindset. 70-20-10 means we're going to focus 10% of our efforts on transformational things, right? These are the big bets. maybe 1 out of 100 of these things is going to pay off, but the one thing that's going to pay off is going to be transformational. 20% are going to be on sustaining innovations. So we're going to make our business better. And then 70%, the vast majority of your innovation work should be focused in on incremental, really boring innovations, right? How do we make our board packet more efficient? How do we increase the efficiency of our call center by 3 seconds in terms of calls while increasing satisfaction? And then the last thing is just this concept of contrarian management practices. If you go into organizations, and now as a consultant that helps organizations fix these problems, I know that I have a job for life because the management practices in most organizations creates this giant hairball of things that just don't work. So trying to keep a more human aspect within it as well. So we're not going to discuss these things directly today, but I want to talk to you about the last aspect of this, which is strategy. And do you guys remember when Will Ferrell used to imitate George W. Bush? You guys remember this? Do you guys remember George W. Bush? We're going to the oldies. We got Rumsfeld and George W. Bush, who now, quite honestly, seem like delightful people. I'm just saying. He had this famous skit on Saturday Night Live, which is our big sketch show, where he talked about not strategy but strategery. And if you remember, George W. Bush is very well known for getting his words wrong. And this was a famous quote from George W. Bush, which makes absolutely no sense. But in the book, I talk about strategery, just as a joke, is to focus on things that your competition either can't or won't do, right? That's the essence of strategy to me. We have to leverage our differences, which are cooperative ownership, people over profits, and deep local knowledge. Those are the things that differentiate us, right? And we can use technology to enhance those types of things, but at the essence, the work that I do with all those organizations that I showed you, it's all about leveraging this stuff. This is the stuff that makes us different, okay? I'm gonna walk you through a case study of one organization that I have worked with that kind of took this methodology and mentality and put it into practice. But you know, when I think about this concept of our collective differentiation, is there anything that you think is missing? We talk about cooperative ownership structure, talk about people over profits, we talk about deep local knowledge. What else comes to mind when you think about differentiation within your institution or your industry? Anything that comes to mind? Or anybody leverage these really effectively at your organization? Whoa, we got a hand up really quick. All right, here I come.
Hi. I think people like us compared to the banks. You mention a credit union, and people generally, they're very they're very positive towards the idea. So yeah, I think they're on our side to start off with.
And that tends to be like a nice outcome of being able to leverage these types of things, right? I was talking with who was I talking with last night? Everyone, I can't pick it out, but someone. Where's my pen-on guy? Where is he? He's just left. All right. Oh well. He's got another client. But talking about some of their lending schemes as it relates to small dollar loans, right? And the practices that they have, which, you know, realistically, they could charge a heck of a lot more for their small dollar loans, but since they have a people over profits mentality, the outcome then is, we really love you. And I was really interested after a few pints. I had to kind of go back over this morning and learn a little bit more about the credit union. But on their website, they have a Google reviews, and they have, I think, over 2,000 Google reviews, and they're 4.9 out of 5, right? It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. So that's an interesting outcome. You know, maybe they have the entire staff. Staff wrote it. Any other comments around differentiation? I mean, yeah, the collective difference. Anybody here able to leverage this concept of cooperative ownership structure? It's a complex topic to talk about with a consumer, but if effectively done, can really illustrate the difference compared to your competition? It's a tough one. And then deep and local knowledge, I think, is something that the banking world is really challenged with coming up with an answer to that, because their whole outcome is scale and size. So I rely also on a lot of other philosophers, the greatest of which is Mike Tyson, and I think that this is the greatest quote in the world, is that you can have a great strategy or a great plan until you get punched in the face. So it's necessary to have strategy be flexible according to your external environment. And then really, kind of leaning on the giants of strategy. There's two that are my favorites, and I would encourage you all to read them. Michael Porter is from Harvard Business School, and his famous quote around strategy is, essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. It's a subtractive process. And one of the things, and I don't know if this is reflective in your strategic plans, but when I typically go in and work with a credit union, the strategic plan is just way too complicated. And it's very thick, and it's people don't understand the strategy. So being subtractive in the process. And then Richard Rummel, which is probably less of a common name that people associate with. He's a UCLA professor, and he's got like a kind of a come hither look on this picture. He wrote a wonderful book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and one of his watchwords is simply being ambitious is not a strategy, right? So he had worked with thousands of organizations, and what he found was like a lot of the pronouncements that companies made were just simply ambitious statements about the future, and it didn't include coherent actions as a result of it. So I've kind of figured out that making really good strategy, and whether you're talking about how do we integrate technology into our operating model, how do we differentiate ourselves amongst the competition, or any other kind of strategic question, is answering these three basic questions. And that's the other thing that I have observed as I've worked with credit unions across North America, is that we tend to complicate things, right? So keeping things simple is quite important. And what I'd like you to do at your tables for maybe like the next 5 minutes, and we're not going to do a full report out, but I'll ask people if they want to volunteer, is focus in on that first question, right? So initially, going back to that model of credit union evolution, when we founded ourselves, and maybe Paul, you can tell us what that money in the tin was used for Christmas presents. Okay, so there was a very clear need established in terms of solving for the problem. When we think about it today, think about like around your table for the next 3 minutes. We're not going to do too long, but just to kind of switch things up here is, what problem are we trying to solve at our credit union? That's like the essence, the most important question to ask. So real quickly for the next 3 minutes, just kind of talk amongst yourselves if you feel comfortable sharing your credit union's problem that you're trying to solve. Anybody want to share like the actual problem that you're trying to solve at your credit union? And is it significantly different from what your founding fathers and mothers had in mind? I'm really good at awkward silences. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I just say that as somebody who's not really involved in credit unions, everything I'm hearing, I hear about lots of different things, not just credit unions. Most family businesses, for example, have a succession problem. Lots of organisations which are founded upon a membership-based or a cooperative-based scheme, from golf clubs through to mutual organisations, friendly societies, all have the same problems because we live in a different time, different world. And part of the problem, it seems to me, is that selling something about cooperative ownership, which is, and I speak very much from a UK perspective, is kind of invisible. The discourse, the way that it's talked about, is completely invisible to huge amounts of the populace. That's the problem, I think, is how do you make yourselves visible and relevant? The problems are still the same as they've always been. The solutions are very similar to what they've always been. The fact is that we're, as not just cooperativism, mutualism, lots of different things. we're almost invisible to most of the public.
So great. Because when I ask this question of credit unions that are objectively good institutions, the answer that I usually get is, what problem are you trying to solve? Now think about this from the mind of a CEO. The problem we're trying to solve is we need to get to 10 billion in assets by 2030. Like that's not the problem. That could be an outcome. And that's why thinking about it from a human perspective and a human needs perspective is something that's missing, right? And I think you elaborated on that. Any last individual want to share things that were talked about at the table? Who do we have? Oh, there we go.
I think one of the big things that we're missing is sort of education. And, we talk about children growing up. It's a very different model in Ireland where it's sort of in their DNA. And I think it's how we reach out to those and, get them to understand it's not part of the curriculum. They don't know what an APR is. They go into loan sharks when they reach, a certain age because they don't know who to turn to. So we need to do a lot more work.
That's great, yeah. And that's probably fairly common to what the needs were at the founding of many organizations. I know in the US, most of the credit unions were founded in the 20s and 30s. And it had to do with, people just didn't have access to credit, right? The only people that had access to credit were the people that didn't need it, which were rich people. That's largely been solved, much like you. Anyone can get credit anywhere. The question is for what price? And fundamentally, the question is, are you educated about the right choice for your financial well-being? So thanks for that. The other things I wanted to talk about just in terms of strategy making and 3 questions, and next we're going to go through I think a case study that's pretty interesting and unique, and I'm really proud of this credit union for the outcomes and decisions that they've made, is once you have a problem that you've identified, then you have policies in place. And I don't mean board policies or management policies. I mean kind of concepts of how you're going to solve this problem in place. And I'm going to kind of give you some aspects of here's some checkpoints to think about. So once you have policies, and these are just kind of your guiding principles about solving for the problem, and then from there, what coherence actions do we have to enforce these policies? So these are kind of the typical things that you would see in a strategic plan. We're going to do X, and Y is going to occur by 2025 Q3 kind of stuff. So the more typical things. So this may seem very, very basic. And it is, because strategy making should not be a complex activity. It should be complex in terms of what you're thinking about and how to differentiate yourself. But fundamentally, these are the 3 questions that I found to be the most important types of things. So what I thought I'd do is just kind of bring you through an example of the infamous ABC credit union, fictitious but real credit union. And walk you through an example and see if this kind of activates you. So let me give you some context for this credit union. So first of all, they are based in the middle of the United States, fairly vibrant economy. They're the largest credit union in their state, but it's not a very populous state. They're the #1 small business lender, and they're the #1 home lender in the state. Right, even compared to the national banks. So they're quite successful, and the CEO recognized that their focus prior to this strategic reset was all around financial well-being, right? Education, focusing in on identifying what the needs are to make people financially healthy. And that strategy had been in place, to her credit, for 15 years. She was well ahead of the game around talking about financial well-being compared to other financial institutions. But what she started to see that her growth was starting to slow. So around that comment, what happens when growth starts to slow? And she was also seeing that her competitors were starting to copy her playbook, right? The playbook was fairly obvious about what they were trying to do. And she said, we need to solve a different problem in a different way. So through all of the tactics that we discussed earlier, talking to actual people and your members and involving your employees, is that they kind of diagnosed the problem. And the problem statement that they came up with was, in the United States, and this is based on a lot of research as well, but really succinctly, is that women face unique challenges on their path to financial security. So still related to financial well-being, but going much deeper and more narrow into a specific segment of the population. So they face challenges on their path to financial security. Number one, women live much longer than men in the United States, and I think that that's the case pretty much everywhere. The Darwin Awards are a real thing. Guys falling off ladders, not taking care of themselves, all of those types of things. Women save less as a result of just societal norms. Men tend to be the breadwinners. That's changing in the United States. But as a result, women tend to save less. And then they tend to earn less over their lifetimes because of child rearing and other aspects. So this was the problem that they're trying to solve for. Financial well-being of financial security of women. So once they came up with a problem statement, you guys remember the scientific method, right? You kind of come up with a hypothesis statement. They came up with this hypothesis statement. They said, if ABC Credit Union focuses its efforts on improving women's financial equity, then the percentage of women entering their retirement years in poverty will decrease by the year 2050. So this is a long-term play, okay? So some of the checkpoints to question are, is this problem that we're trying to solve just big enough, right? So you can solve a problem that's almost too narrow, but not deep enough. It won't be big enough. And is this problem we are trying to solve unique amongst our competitors? The answer to those two questions in this case was absolutely yes. None of their competitors were focused specifically on women as a target market and specifically improving the financial equity of women over the long term. So when you talk about problems you're trying to solve, this is the problem they're trying to solve right here. By the year 2050, they want to be able to measure that the women in their field of membership are not entering retirement age at a certain level of poverty compared to where they are today. So I'm going to pause there and see what your reactions are to this as a problem. I mean, this is the entire credit union's focus for the next, I don't know how long 2050 is from here. It's too late on a Friday, but several decades. This is their focus. This is their strategy. What would you say to this? What would you say to this? Oh, Nick.
I think it's great as it's a very long way from there to doing things, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, it's like it's a huge statement that could easily, particularly given the timescale, could easily become just some vacuous, yeah.
Fluff and jargon. Yeah. So this is just the first point is that, hey, here's a problem that we know exists, and we're going to try and solve it. And I'm going to talk to you about the specific actions that they take.
There's no quantitative element to it. So from what percentage to what percentage is success, or what percentage is failure, just that there will be a decrease in percentage. And also, how do they know that they've contributed to that percentage and not wider social policy may have contributed to that percentage?
Great point. We have no social policy in the United States, so we don't have that problem. But I get your point, and that was one of the big debates that they had around the board table. Is like, how do we know that we're influencing this? And this was kind of related to a question or a comment that someone had around flexibility and strategy. Is that they said, well, we will measure it when we figure out how to measure it, but we know that this is a problem that we're trying to solve, and if we can, as part of the strategy, what they're trying to do, and I'll show you later, is to encourage other financial institutions to come into this same set of activities. But great comments and great point. Any other comments or points about this before we get into like what they're actually doing as a result of this? Hey Nick, if we could go to that next slide, can you do that from there? Forgot to bring the clicker. So when we talked about policies, that's kind of, hey, you got this problem statement. And once again, this is greatly simplified, but just to kind of give you a sense of how I think strategy making might work. So they had a policy, basically summarized as followed. ABC Credit Union will target the medium and long-term financial needs of women and their families in our field of membership. Okay, so that's their kind of their main thrust of the policy. This is how we're going to do it, and I'll show you the activities next. And additionally, internally, we're going to build actively build leadership opportunities for women within the credit union. So as I mentioned, or you may have hit upon this, is that this credit union is run by a female, and most of the senior management team is female as well. The board is 50-50. So this was kind of one of their policies. This is kind of their driving thing for, okay, like, we're not talking about activities now, we're talking about just the general thrust of how we're going to achieve this strategy. Is we're going to target women, and we're going to create internal opportunities for women to advance throughout the credit union. So some of the checkpoints is, we talked, Nick, you mentioned it before, jargon and platitudes, right? I see this all the time in strategic plans, is really beautiful words that don't mean anything. Just being extremely direct about what we're going to do. They say they're going to do two things. Externally, we're going to target women and their families for kind of medium and long-term needs. You can kind of imagine what that might be. Like, biggest wealth building activity within the United States is home ownership, so focusing in on the things that they do really well, and small business creation. And then, are we establishing clear boundaries for what's in and out of scope? Yep. We've got some things right here as in terms of who's going to be our target market. It's not like we're going to exclude men from our marketing, but our target market is women. And then, most importantly, this is something that is very much missing from many strategic plans, is that, does our most junior staff member understand what this means? Right? It's such a great checkpoint, because take the person that has been there for one day, and you show them a one-page strategic plan. And will they be able to recite that? Will they be able to understand what it means, even if they haven't been in financial services? So these are really good checkpoints. And once again, this is greatly simplified just for the time and the purpose that we have here. But that's kind of their policy that they have in place. And I'll show you next what their series of actions are. Any reactions to this now, as we get a little bit deeper into it? Any reactions, any pushback? Yeah, here we go.
Sorry, no pushback, I guess. In a personal view, though, what I love about it is that it is exclusionary. In that I think one of our challenges as credit unions in the UK is often that we try to be everything for everybody, and we're not big enough to be everything for everybody. What I like about this is that it does focus on a particular segment. It tries to analyse what the particular needs are of that segment, and then I am fairly confident we're going to find out there was a load of action behind trying to address those needs. And that, for me, is something that we could probably benefit from trying within this country. Now, it might mean a different thing for each of us, but trying to be a bit more focused about who we serve, and accepting that some people we're not going to be able to serve as well as we would like to, therefore we shouldn't try to.
Exactly. And there's I don't know who came up with this terminology, but it's one that I love. It's called the love-hate paradox, right? So you think about certain brands that are very successful. I could mention like Mini Cooper, right? Some people absolutely love it. Other people that just love extremely large automobiles absolutely hate it, right? But they're deep and narrow in terms of understanding their demographic and who they're serving. And actually, as one of the tactics that I use to encourage this credit union to be a bit exclusionary in terms of their strategy, came from right here in Manchester. And I understand that the cooperative bank has a history, but I drew a great deal of inspiration from their ethical bank campaign, and some of the activities that actually was Chris Smith, I think was the head of public affairs at the time, and the advertising that the cooperative bank had around, hey, if you put money in the cooperative bank, these are savings that are ethical. And I know what happened afterwards, but I kind of glossed over the other things as it related to board governance and private equity getting in there. Great point. We're going to go to the next one, just in the spirit of time. Oh, thanks, Nick. Whoop. Yeah, if we can go to the next one. So from policies, then you have a coordinated set of actions, right? And this is where you start to get into, okay, how are you going to do this? Okay, it's great to have a problem that you've identified that's kind of unique. Yep, you set some policies that are kind of interesting. What are the coherent actions that you're going to use to enforce this policy? And they have to be logical, they have to make sense. So in the case of this credit union, and by the way, they're about a year into this strategy, so we don't know if it's going to be successful, but so far they've been getting really interesting reviews. So remember some of their policies. It had to do with, we're going to target women, right, just briefly, and we're going to create opportunities internally for our employees, specifically women employees. So what are they going to do? They're going to do some financial education. We're going to increase women's confidence in money. So when they say that, to inspire action, that's financial education targeted specifically at women. This credit union has a program called Red Shoes, which is a financial education program that they've customized specifically for the needs of women and head of households, right? So very specific. It's not that men can't do it, but it's targeted at women. We're going to help build women's health by helping them own their own homes and businesses. So, hey, if you're single, you want to own a home, we're going to help you. If you're head of household, you're going to help you own a home. And then we're going to also help you start businesses. So remember, this leverages the things that they are already good at. They're #1 small business lender in the state, #1 home mortgage lender in the state. So this is stuff that they already do, but they've kind of focused their efforts more on that target market. We're going to help people that are struggling. We're going to help them create financial plans by helping them we're going to create products that help them pay down their debt and increase their savings, kind of typical stuff that credit unions do. The unique thing is that we're actually just targeting women more and specifically. And then most importantly, through scholarship programs, they're going to support women in increasing their lifetime earning power. So one of the things that this credit union had before this strategy was a fairly generic scholarship program. So they would offer scholarships for people in the community, in the field of membership, mostly based on geography, and said, hey, we're gonna give $100,000 in scholarships per year, and there was no rhyme or reason for who got it other than these are exceptionally interesting young people. Now they're focused only on women and only on categories where women have traditionally been excluded from the economy, and they tend to be higher earning types of categories. So STEM, science, technology, engineering categories, and financial services is what they're starting to fund. So what they hope to do is have this longer term impact to help increase women's lifetime earnings. And the one that is the most dramatic is that now they are sharing publicly on their website their internal pay practices around gender equity in terms of what is $1 worth to a male employee versus a female employee at this credit union, and what does the personnel representation look like? And this was a real dig at their competitors because they recognize that, #1, this is the largest institution in the state. It's run by a woman. The vast majority of the senior management team is women, and nobody knows about it, right? And this is unique in financial services, typically speaking, unfortunately. I think it's like 6% of all CEOs in financial services in the United States are women. But in this credit union, it's the vast majority. So what they wanted to do is just kind of puff out, well, I shouldn't say puff out their chest. That's the wrong terminology. They were very proud. They were very proud of this, and they wanted to publicly share their information so that their competitors would kind of look at themselves and say, geez, we don't look like that. That's going to be harmful for us in terms of talent attraction, talent retention, and oh, by the way, in the United States, I don't know what it is like here, but same job by gender, women make 81 cents on the dollar per men, right? And it's not a common practice to publicly share your pay practices, but they have done this in a very public manner, and it's kind of a dig at their competitors. So the checkpoints there are identified. So what do you think about that? Now, is it starting to come into a little bit clearer focus? Yeah. Hand you the microphone right here.
I've seen somewhere there are some targets, so it can actually be measured as to whether they're being successful or not.
Yep, and they definitely are starting to come up with targets. once again, I did not get permission to share specifics around this, but so this is highly generalizable, but you can start to see that they're building out activities which would have things that would be much easier to measure. And the interesting thing is that they all bump up against that long-term measure of women entering their retirement years in poverty, right? Which is a problem since we don't have much of a social policy in the United States. Yeah. Any last comments on this one before we wrap up for the day? Yeah.
I think one of the things it demonstrates, that there's something that was missing from an earlier slide when we talked about what we're good at, was impact. It's about the impact that we can have on people's lives and communities, a measurable impact. And I think maybe, as opposed to, you know, the big banks or anyone else, we're very, very good at it. We're not necessarily good at measuring it properly or telling people about it. But I think, you know, this is demonstrating that.
And like the historical context of this credit union is that they were originally chartered to serve state employees, right? And they went through a bunch of mergers, and the original problem that they were chartered to solve for has kind of been solved. State employees are actually very stable financially types of individuals, and their needs are just fairly basic and hard to differentiate. So this is one of the reasons why they kind of went in this direction. So hopefully that was you know, an example that can kind of give you a little bit of context for what it means, and just to kind of summarize, you know, this is how I see strategy making. And once again, I like to keep it simple so people can kind of glom onto it and take action as a result of it, is that the realization that there's some sort of big problem in the world, we can solve this problem in a new and/or novel way. And then by focusing on a deep and narrow solution, let's create a system where even normal people can solve this problem. Like fundamentally, those are the lessons that I've learned working with dozens and dozens of really dynamic and progressive credit unions. So those are the ends of my comments. And I just want to share my contact information and thank Nick and Paul and all of you for your hospitality. Being able to come all the way over here is such a treat. You know, I did feel cooped up for the past 3 years in the United States. Even though it's a big country, it's nice to come to a different part of the world and experience your hospitality. And I really want to thank you and urge you and encourage you to keep in touch if you ever have any questions about the work that I do, or if you want connections to some of the credit unions in the States, I can help facilitate that. But I think now I'm going to turn it over to Paul. So Paul, here you go, sir.
Okay, thanks, George. That was great. Thank you very much for your intervention today. And I'm looking at the time, and we will have a hard stop at 4. So we've just really now got to go through the concluding part of our day, kind of a sum up or a wrap up together, summing and wrapping up together. One of the things sometimes I do with, so people are rushing for the trains already. Okay, good journey back to South Wales. One of the things sometimes I do with students when we've had a long day of training is go around and ask them, what have they retained from today? You know, we go through to training events, we come to conferences, you know, but if we can go out the door with 1 or 2 really key learning points in our minds, that's going to change the way that we operate in our credit unions in the future, it's been a success. It's been a success. You can't remember everything, but they can retain 1 or 2 items when you're going out the door. So I thought I'd write down and just kind of think about, what have I retained? You know, what have I retained from today? The first thing I've retained from our first contributions this morning was really, I suppose I could sum it up in terms of control. Control. We know that digitalization is the way forward, while many of our credit unions are many steps along the way. We know we've further to go. A lot of the kind of information that we were giving, or the perspectives that we were given, sometimes even beyond us, even to imagine. We talked about known and unknown unknowns, you know, where are we going? But one of the things that came through was, you know, in terms of dealing with vendors and dealing with people that are selling us new technology, the credit unions need to be asking the right questions, demanding the right kind of services, and not just accepting what they're given at great cost. And so I just thought it all summed up in the word of control, and was a really good intervention from one of our participants about, being able to ask the right questions. But even asking the right questions is sometimes you need to think about and get support in what questions to ask. So I thought that was the first one. The other big theme that has run through today, all the way through, has been the theme of collaboration. Whether that's collaboration in user groups with vendors, or whether it's collaboration in QSOs, it's something that's come up time and time again in different kind of context. We need to collaborate. We see so much collaboration beginning, particularly in Ireland. There's a lot of new collaborative kind of initiatives taking place, with credit unions coming together to achieve, whether it's payment services or new products and services or whatever. So collaboration was a big theme. But another big theme, maybe even a bigger theme today, which came up from many people's comments and came up from a lot of our the interventions from panel members and speakers, really was people. And I love that title of your book, George, Banking on a Human Scale, because that's what really we are really about. We are about the human touch, about our people. And many people mentioned that. And one or two people said, well, what about all this digitalization? Will it take us away from people? Will it make us kind of like distant banks? We won't be the people-centered organizations that we originally set out to be. But really the answer is not necessarily, because digitalization and new technology can actually take us to people and allow us to be. And there was a comment from one of the tables up here about saying as the more and more that digital systems allow for all the kind of the things that have got to be done a lot more quickly and more efficiently, it gives us a lot more time actually to talk to people. That people could actually come in the office. We still have offices and branches, but if we're not kind of weighed down with a lot of the processes and procedures that we used to do manually, we can have more time for people. Also, it was also mentioned where people includes the staff in our organizations. I think Paul mentioned this, about the importance of taking staff with us. I like that theme of that thought about the laptops. How do we open the laptop? Well, there's a long way to go into the kind of new digital world, with our staff. Our staff need to be with us. And then I think the fourth point, of course, which is really just from George's presentation now, is my learning about strategy. We always talk about strategy. We talk about being strategic thinkers. Many of us are board members. I'm a board member of my credit union. Many board members in the room. We talk about strategy. We talk about strategy with our CEOs. We employ CEOs to actually contribute and develop strategy on behalf of the credit union. And it's great to see a clear, systematic approach to the development of strategy, to the development of action plans, the development of measurement, and then also the kind of somebody mentioned about the importance of impact. So all of those those were my four kind of takeaways. Everybody around the room will have another takeaway. I just hope you've got one or two to take home with you and say when somebody says to you Saturday tomorrow, Monday maybe, when you're back in the credit union, what did you learn on Friday? Well, I learned this, and this. I believe we have four things. That's great. We've been a success. Just a little bit, I don't know how much I'm supposed to talk about Swoboda. We've got Swoboda. Yes. Some of our research, what's coming out. There was one or two, there's one or two others I had actually on here that I wanted to mention. One that we've got a paper being written at the moment because somebody mentioned about the cooperative bank and ethical banking and learning from the co-op bank's previous experience before it went bust and kind of no longer being a cooperative. Well, that's a different story. But learning from its kind of development of an ethical policy and ethical banking, we have a paper being written based on the early experience of the cooperative bank and lessons that credit unions can learn about being ethical financial institutions. We have got papers coming out on governance, of course, the CEO on the board, the remuneration of directors. That's the second one, isn't it? Value, strategies and marketing. That's the one I mentioned, the cooperative bank. Lessons for credit unions in cooperative ethics. We've got collaboration, of course, a great theme today. We've got a paper coming out on the barriers to a central finance facility for credit unions in Ireland. We're also doing a study on some of the liquidity challenges that some of our credit unions are facing at the moment. I think that's all of the...
We've been joined today by Rachel and Bridget, who are students at the University of Galway, and they're starting a secondment with us in January. Some of you may remember Malachy and Mary, who came to our conference here last year and then were really helpful with a whole range of things, including the conference in Portlaoise. So, and we were delighted to work with them. So we're delighted to welcome Bridget and Rachel to credit unions, and hopefully they'll become just as geeky as us in a much shorter period of time. And we're very grateful to them for coming over and helping out today. The theme of the conference, and I'm going to say this, that we've kind of touched on it in meetings, but I'm going to say it, put it out there. We're going to talk about collaboration, and we're going to try and talk about getting into collaboration, doing collaboration, because I think everybody in this room accepts and understands that, whether you believe that merger might be the strategic long-term way, the way in which we achieve scale. Collaboration is also going to be a part of that story. But we get that. So now what? How do we do it? And we're going to, there's some initiatives in Ireland, as Paul mentioned, that are really interesting. But we're going to see if we can bring some other examples to bear and get some really good discussion going on how to make collaboration work. The first thing I was told when I joined Cooperative Bank in 1996 was by a grey-haired, grizzled senior manager was, cooperative movement doesn't cooperate, doesn't move. And so that's what we need to prove that that's not right. Thank you again. We're letting you go home early, which what better conference can you go to or one where you actually finish 5 minutes early? So thank you ever so much for coming. Do join us for a drink, and we'll see you again soon, I hope.